Two and one. Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Working in UX Design. And with me today, I have Winnie from Custodian Bank. And she's serving as Custodian Bank's user experience lead and works for Custodian Bank, who has an international presence. So today we're actually going to discuss this topic called blockchain and Web3 usability design, which is something Winnie and I connected on and was discussing in very varied details about blockchain, about Web3 technologies, which she is an early adopter of. But before that, let me please introduce Winnie to all our audience listening in today. So Winnie has actually spent the last 17 years bridging creativity and commerce in design, advertising, and interactive media across the APAC region. She's worked with some of the biggest names, including VML, YNR, a global digital ad agency, and SPH, where she helped to transform a traditional news publisher to a digital news publisher, and one of Singapore's largest media company. And today, she is very passionate about understanding what people truly want, whether it's clients or customers or users, and making sure the experiences she designs is not only functional, but also loved. So Winnie and I had a catch up before this episode to talk about some of our interests, and I'm looking forward to talking to her about blockchain technologies, since she has worked extensively in the finance sector, as well as Web3, where she is an early adopter of different Web3 technologies. So we're actually going to discuss that in detail. But first of all, well, this is quite an interesting period of time in our design sector, Winnie. Everyone's talking about Gen AI, and a lot of people believe like it's crypto winter and everything is kind of dead. As an early adopter of blockchain technologies and Web3, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Dylan, to your virtual studio. And hello, everyone, for joining this session. Thank you for spending your time. So I think before I answer that is one thing I'm really passionate about is really designing for this digital space. I think there's so much to learn, and as designers we evolve a lot as well. So I think taking the take on this evolution of generative AI and I mean, yes, I actually started exploring generative AI quite a few years ago. That was actually when remember like the digital NFTs, they all just started. Everyone was just having this new avenue of expressing their creativity and being able to monetize it. And I find that is actually pretty fascinating. And when I first started with this type of technology, when I enter a few prompts and then magic happens, and I thought it was actually very interesting, and that actually led me to exploring more. Okay, so what we can leverage on as designers, right? Yeah, really quite exciting times.
Yeah, that's so great to hear that you're not just an early adopter of blockchain and Web3 technologies, but also an early adopter of Gen AI. Yeah, so understand we were able to discuss like some of the technologies you embrace. I know you can't speak in details as part of your work about it, but mainly from a maybe like a user perspective, right? Like you are using quite a number of like blockchain technologies, like just for your own investments or for your own like use as a user to explore the landscape. Yeah, just trying to understand from your perspective as a design lead, what are some of the usability gaps? Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a good question. So I started my design career quite early, and I would say that when I grew up even, right, like I could see the evolution of Web 1.0 and then Web 2.0, and then now we're talking about Web 3, right? So I think as a designer, I learned a lot from then as well. Like I really started learning how to design a web page, let's say, in the Web 1.0 era. I mean, as compared to now, that is actually such a huge development and evolution, right? I think in Web 1.0, we are all just, consumer of that information. And even if you now look back, it's like, oh my God, it's like, wow, so obiang, right? And then after that, you move towards like Web 2.0, that's when we actually started to interact with a lot of content, right? And that's where like all the UGC starts coming in. People are starting to post, and that behavior changed as well, right? From reading and then to read and write, so to speak, right? And being able to interact with the system. And then now Web 3.0 are talking about having that ownership of what we have created, right? And I think as a consumer point of view, I don't know how many people actually realize that we are starting to actually have a lot of this content ownership, right? In Web 2.0, we used to upload a lot of stuff, but I'm sure you have like thousands of photo albums on like, I don't know, MySpace, Friendster of the time, and then Facebook, and then now Meta, right? And then now we're actually talking about, hey, we have such an overload of data that we have fed on to the web. And then now we are kind of like reverse story a bit to say, hey, okay, now that we are actually giving all these companies our data, okay, and then now we're talking about how can I actually have ownership of this data. So I think from that point of view, I think there's a lot of usability gaps in the sense whereby we are not just no longer just designing an experience for how the users is interacting or uploading information, but it's also about how do I keep some of these like assets, right, digitally. I'm not talking about digital assets, but like, how do we actually own those assets? And for example, if we post some of our favorite like drawings, and when we actually decided to commercialize it, and then someone actually see it, they pick it up, they can do whatever they want, right? And then how can we stop them, right? So I think from the experience perspective, there's actually a lot of thoughts around like, how can we ensure that when users are interacting with these things, they are also fed in an environment where they feel safe to upload some of this environment, and knowing that they still have the right. So I think that's actually a kind of like big piece that the industry is actually trending on, right? The topic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I would say, personally, as someone who invests in cryptocurrency in the past, as well as like NFTs, I was very excited by the possibility that the technology brought in terms of like blockchain technologies and ownership. But there was just so much friction, right? Like converting from like Singapore dollars to like a virtual cryptocurrency, and then like using that to buy NFTs, and then like paying for gas fees and stuff like that. So from a user perspective, there's just so much friction. But the interface, as you mentioned, right? Obiang is another word for ugly back in 1.0. And I remember those times. I think there are some websites that are still in Web 1.0 format. So in those times, and then like looking at the sleekness of like Web3, it also is worth pointing out, because of that sleekness of the design, it sometimes misleads people into thinking like Web3 is like legit, right? But we know that not every Web3 project is legit, and there's a lot of scammers. Yeah, so I think that's kind of like a very interesting point. Just wondering, because you're in the finance sector, and you're designing for trust, you're designing for security. Just want to get your thoughts on like, are there any specific areas that you look out for when designing for trust or designing for like security? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think like what you mentioned about like friction and then design for, yes, definitely trust and security is always a big piece, and also around transparency, right? How can we actually ensure especially when it comes to, financial interactions, whether is it like transaction or is it like viewing someone's, personal account and things like that, right? I would say that being transparent about what are some of the activities that is actually happening, I think that is also something that is quite essential, right? I give you like an example from a consumer perspective, right? If I were to actually go to an exchange and look at like certain currency exchange, right? And then I was supposed to, let's say, transfer an asset to you, right? Whether it's like an NFT or something, right? And because the process itself is so complicated, and if we click our button or I just acknowledge the wrong thing, I might just send it to the wrong address, or I might even send it to the wrong amount, right? So it's like, for example, there was this experience I came across, right? So they let you know about you have been sending this particular currency, right? But this currency has an equivalent to, let's say, a particular like Sing dollars or USD or something, right? And instead of providing that facility on that platform itself, like some of these values are hidden. And, if the user is not savvy enough, might not be able to know where to actually verify it. And when you don't know how to verify it, then, just because of user behavior and like to your point, the sleekness of, the whatever interface, right? The button that clicks on transfer looks so pretty and beautiful. And then you just like click on it because that is actually the logical next step in a sense, right? So I think like there are things like small things like even like information, or is it like a fine print, or is it like a note to say that, hey, you're about to transfer to whoever, please verify you sent. I think things like that actually really helps to bring out that trust and transparency.
Yeah, I think you bring a very great point about like allowing users to make mistakes, right? Like even in the banking context, like an additional zero is a big difference in terms of the amount of money being sent. And you're right. I mean, from a regulatory perspective, right? Because banks are regulated, and because of that regulation, there might be some guardrails to protect users, normal users, and on this aspects, and there might be some fine prints for users to look at and think about. But in the Web3 space and the blockchain space, because it's unregulated, anything goes, right? So it really depends on whether the teams or the exchanges and the platforms are they actually working towards sort of like a best in class kind of like experience where they want to protect the interests of the users, or are they, could be intentional, could be unintentional, trying to encourage users to get to just the next step, and so that they complete their transactions as quickly as possible. So you brought up a very, very good point. And I think that's also primarily why, even though there's a lot of talk about it during the hype and the peak of cryptocurrency and NFTs, the people who adopt this new technology is nowhere near Gen AI, right? Like I know of so many more people, if I say in a room, like who's used Gen AI before, like 8 or 9 out of 10 people would have raised their hand. But if like I say, hey, anyone owns an NFT or cryptocurrency, like it's like just two people or 3 people out of 10. Yeah, so I think that's sort of like the major differences. Any thoughts or anything to add on?
Yeah, so I was actually secretly writing this diary article that I have, like, just wondering, because as a user trying to learn, right, about these technologies, the barrier is really high, right? Like, because the subject itself is, if let's say you're not in a finance background or things like that, that is just so much to learn about, like the topic itself, and then the structure itself. It's almost quite technical, I would say. Like it took me a long time to actually even grasp the topic.
Right, yeah.
After reading or like watching hundreds of YouTube videos and then, searching.
And then sending small amounts of money to make sure that I can lose this $100 or something like that.
Investment aside, but it's actually like, I think, understanding the topic itself and then how it works, the mechanics itself, it's really complicated, right? So like for me, before I worked in a custodian bank, I was for advertising space and media space. So honestly, the topic about like banking, all this is also already very difficult. And then you are going into this new, new topic, right? Blockchain and things like that. So it makes it really a lot of things to learn from. That is actually, I won't deny that it's actually a very steep learning curve. But one of the best ways as human beings to learn is to try out something. Like interact with it, try out and things like that. Even like I'll find that even topics like, let's say, metaverse, right? If you remember like 2-3 years ago, but this is like a hot topic, and this also when Facebook changed the name to Meta, right? So, and that was actually one of the channels, right? That really, in my opinion, right, set the cryptocurrency and the Web3 world to the next level, because it is actually a totally different platform and avenue for people to interact. There's so much more possibilities, and up to today, right, there's still a lot of possibility. So when I started from where I kind of like had familiarity in metaverse, because I used to play a lot of games, right? So I'm not sure whether in the audience, you guys, play like those kind of like MMORPG games. But in my time, I used to play a lot of like Diablo, World of Warcraft. So that was like already a peek into how the metaverse, right? And then it actually evolved into a metaverse suddenly became a digital lipstick. Anything you have 3D space is called metaverse. Right? And then, but that was actually an avenue, really, you can see that interesting things that are happening. And then it later on evolved into, now that we have all these different virtual worlds, how can we connect them together, right? And if, let's say, in the context of playing a game, can my game character jump from one world to another world, just like that movie, right? Ready Player One. So, and then from there, I started kind of like the journey, right? Because I kind of lean upon a familiar concept that I know, and then linking it to, a little bit of like banking, how does digital currency work? Because like even in the sort of like a virtual worlds, right? A lot of these games, they have their in-game currency. I used to like earn a lot of gold from World of Warcraft, right? And then I used it to trade for items and things like that. So that was actually really the first concept that was already like happening like 20 years ago. But at that point of time, cryptocurrency wasn't a word. Metaverse wasn't a word, but that concept exists and have evolved a lot, right? So I think coming back to the learning of that technology, I think it takes a while. And so I felt that using that technology, right, is actually a way to really help us to understand the concept a little bit more, try it out. But you can see that actually a lot of this kind of experiences that happen, right? Again, happen in the Web 2.0, sending files. Now it's like you're sending currency, you're sending digital assets, it's the same thing, it's the same concept. But of course, there's a lot more steps and process to do it, right? Because this involves a lot in terms of like digital ownership. Which is really the core.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit deeper about what you said over there. It almost seems like you have this natural curiosity of like new technologies and the new, partially because of your gaming background. And I think the last time we spoke, you mentioned curiosity being one of the very important traits that designers should have. How has the curiosity affected your career trajectory?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, well, I will say that, since young, I was actually very curious about like things, right? Because as kids, I'm sure all of us, like, went through a phase where when we were young, we always ask a lot of like whys, right? Hey, why this, why that? Then as we grow to become more adult, and then, suddenly become more, we kind of we learn a lot more self-control, right? And then we actually started to kind of like limit ourselves the way that we ask questions. But I'm sure a lot of like designers here, or even I myself, when I conduct workshop, the funny thing is I always tell people like, oh, you can ask any question. No question is a stupid question. To be honest, like there are times when if let's say I'm in the audience, I don't have that to ask a question. So coming back to curiosity is actually really about being curious about something, giving yourself the permission to ask a question that is unseemly, like, it can look as stupid or whatnot. But yeah, I got one friend that who told me, if you feel like, you don't know an answer, at least if you ask the question, you became one question smarter, right? And because of that, there was actually one time when I was actually working in SPH, so I was facing this like mid-career crisis sort of a thing, and I was like, sitting by the office desk, and I was asking myself, okay, so like I already had quite a number of experience working and day in day out, like grinding. So what am I doing here? Like kind of like asking this kind of questions. And at the point of time, I had an agile mentor, so I brainstormed with him in terms of, okay, what can I do next? Like, what more can I do next as a designer? Like, is there anything else I can do? Right? And then that's when I was being introduced on the concept of, okay, why not? Let's do a brainstorming session on like where you are, where do you want to be, blah, blah, blah. And that was actually, to be honest, was my first time also called like, learning UX, right? Because I was doing more digital design. So UX wasn't a common word, and I wouldn't label myself as a UX designer at the point of time, right? And it was actually through that session that I decided, okay, I want to do something for the wildlife. And interesting enough, it is actually my passion for wildlife that opened up the doors of UX for me. And so that was actually my kind of like first spark point of being curious, because I was curious about what I can do more as a designer. And that actually led me to a lot more opportunities to explore this like whole concept about like UX and things like that. And it actually led me to really think about, what else I can do in my career, right? So, and that kind of like, okay, long story short, then it actually landed me now exploring different concepts. So I personally, I'm very passionate about helping people to actually learn new things. So in my current workspace, I organize a lot of like monthly series, like to talk about all these kind of like new concepts, right? Like NFTs, crypto, AI, Gen AI, and things like that. And I invite a lot of speakers to come and speak about, because I felt that this is also an area where we are all learning, and I want to create that safe environment for people to ask any question if they want, and they ask it and they get direct answers from experts, right? So that they have this, I call it instilling digital confidence, so that whoever that walks out of the office, when they go for an event, they can network with someone, they have that digital confidence to actually talk about a certain topic, like let's say metaverse, right? AI. They will not be standing there and, okay, I know nothing, so I can't strike a conversation with someone that I met.
Yeah, I have some like follow-up questions on that actually. But thank you so much for sharing like how curiosity has helped landed you in UX and subsequently, you were saying something about wildlife. Like how is this connected to wildlife? Your career in UX.
Well, so at the point of time, I was actually thinking like, what are some of the, and because I was working in a media company, right? And I was just thinking, okay, like this is actually a good time for me to give back to the society and do something more meaningful with my skill sets. And so at the point of time, like I was just thinking, okay, maybe I can advocate for the wildlife. And by the way, do you know that Singapore is actually one of the major transport hub or illegal wildlife items? So, and it goes through our PSA port every day.
No idea. Wow.
So, I mean, they are just like fascinating stuff about, wow, okay. And because I love wildlife, and I was just thinking like, okay, like even a lot of things like, our traditional TCM and things like that, right? Uses a lot of like wild animal, but it's like actually in modern science, you can have your Panadols and whatever to actually.
But you exploring that, like Is that
Yeah.
like, how do you get into UX? Like, did you do a project for them or
Yes.
something?
So
Yeah.
the thing is, because I was actually pitching to then the editor in terms of, okay, can we run a news coverage around illegal wildlife trade, right? And at that point of time, I didn't have a lot of skills to sell or pitch an idea to a senior executive, right? And then it was actually the point of time that my HR mentor said, okay, when you do a presentation, come up with facts, come up with research. Probably you might want to understand like what readers want to read so that you can actually create
And
content.
most importantly, show rather than just tell.
Yeah, exactly. So and it was actually a interesting period of time because I had to actually take up Toastmasters. I took out like a presentation course, like just to learn how to sell pitch, like 1 minute elevator pitch and blah blah blah, right? And doing a lot of those things. And so it was actually through that process I kind of like applied a lot of like these things I learned from UX, right? Really getting the user sentiment, what is actually the journey, right? Who are we actually placing this type of a story to? Where are we some of the angles? So that was actually kind of like really a good place for me, right, to learn and apply UX. And it actually works at the end of the day because I managed to pitch the idea successfully, and I had a good time, working with some of the editors to actually bring that story to life. So it was actually quite a long journey. And then at that point of time, I had an opportunity to be able to start a UX department with some of my colleagues in SPH, and it was quite fun, right?
So you were the OG, like
yes, OG.
You were the OG for starting that in SPH. Okay. Because I know people who work there today. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
That was a memorable experience. Yeah, so it was actually from there, it actually helped me to really look at how can I actually use UX, right, for other business use cases and things like that. So how I felt that, because I think for me, like, definition of design has evolved a lot, right? I used to come from a world where design is about creating a pretty aesthetics, which is, I still appreciate that, right? But it has evolved to me, I think personally, to like, how do you solve complex business problem? How do you use, how do you actually show the value of design, right? I mean, this has been quite an important topic for a lot of designers these days, right? And yeah.
So I want to kind of like elaborate on a few things, but well, thank you for sharing that your journey into UX design was very much a journey of exploration and curiosity, and then you falling into UX and thinking from the user's perspective to get a story out there. And earlier you mentioned a very interesting event series that you hold in your company, which is a bank, talking about the future of technologies and inviting guest speakers. And we had a very brief opportunity to roughly discuss about it because the project or the community that you build within your company is as old as the community that we have here in working in UX design. So it's a project and endeavor that's been with you for more than 4 years. Like, why do you believe so strongly in evangelizing technology to the rest of your organization? And as I understand, your role is that of a designer, right, and a design leader. So why do you believe so strongly in advocating technology? I would think the head of transformation or the head of IT should be the one doing that, but you are the one who's doing that. So what is driving you to do that? Yeah.
Well, I think like a few things, right? I think one is also like, as we work, from my experience of like working with a lot of stakeholders and collaborators, a lot of people are very passionate around like, how do we change things, or how do we improve a certain process? Like each of us, we just have this innate innovator in us, right? Because as human beings, we are all very creative and we are curious. Well, sometimes our title or role doesn't say that, but each of us, as human beings, we are always looking forward to improvements, to the positive hope for the future, right? And one of the enablers to help us do that today is definitely technology, right? And technology, this is a very difficult subject by itself because it has evolved so much. By the time we finish understanding, let's say, Gen AI, right, the next thing is quantum computing. And right? And there are so much more to learn, right? And sometimes as part of being able to persuade someone, right, to take on an idea that, hey, this is actually a better way of doing things, there must be a certain level of knowledge and appreciation of the technology by the person that you're going to influence or to pitch to, right? And one of the avenues that I do that is to have this type of very open learning sessions, right? To let people have a glimpse, right? Hey, actually, there are a lot of these good technologies out there. What if we can apply just for a slice of it, right? And how much more improvement can we do to whichever the existing platform or is it the existing experience, right? Just by that. It's just like taking the concept of Kaizen, right? The continuous improvement. If I can just improve something 1% improvement on that, I think that is actually a win by itself. But in order to have that happen, we need to be well versed with in terms of what are the technologies that can do. We might not be able to explain, let's say, the the inner workings of LLMs, for example. But if we know how to actually leverage on generative AI to help us to do our work better and be able to come up with creative ideas on applying it and help us in our daily job, right? I think that's a win by itself. So which is why I felt that because with this evolution of technology, it makes us as designers to be even more creative because now you have even more options and solutions that you can propose to actually help others, right? It's no longer about just big bets or just having a prediction of the trend and how it might help. But now you really have a lot of these type of technologies by your fingertips, right? Like even like, let's say ChatGPT, we just have like, if you need ideas on how to do UX research, or even you need ideas on how to improve certain processes, right? Just by the right prompts, we are just able to find out solutions so much more quicker than in the past.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that it helps you with your work as a design leader. It helps you to build trust with your stakeholders. But it also opens up like the possibility of how you interact with technology and use it and take advantage of it and leverage it as part of your process, right? So it sounds like there's quite a number of areas which is what's driving you to continue running this within your organization, evangelizing technology, and not restricting, the stereotype that designers are just doing design, but expanding the broader definition of design and making sure that is not just about making things look pretty over here. Yeah. So I think that's really perfect and wonderful. And when we were having our initial coffee chat and I was talking to you, I think one of the things I was very fascinated by was also your mentality as an investor, right? And the fact that you are not only working in financial services and technology, but before that, you were an investor first, right? You were investing in cryptocurrencies. You were actually investing and playing around with stocks and stuff like that. So I just want to ask you to elaborate briefly for our audience members, like how has being an investor or the process of an investor like help you with your work?
Yeah. Thanks for the question. It's actually quite interesting. To be honest, like the investor mindset, it's not something that I actively apply to my work. Like, hey, I'm going to apply that mindset into my work. So I really appreciate you calling that out, right? So, well, I mean, I would say that this mindset kind of like came from even like, before this like investing, I learned a lot from gaming, right? If I were to actually draw something from the gaming side of the things, right? It's that, I learned as a gamer, you need to like grow your experience, right? And then every time when you have grown to a certain level, right, you unlock certain capabilities, and it kind of like give you like skill points, right? So like let's say every level you actually get like one skill point, and then that's actually where you want to kind of like applied, right? How do you want to improve like this particular character? So I kind of like relate this world is actually around like how do I enhance my skill sets or push myself to learn more, right? It's actually around, okay, because in gaming, as my level goes higher, it takes even longer time to gain a certain experience, to go to the next level so that I have additional skill points to actually develop my character itself. So if I were to look at it that way, is that, as human being, life is short, we don't have a lot of time, right? But there's so much things we want to learn, but we need to prioritize, right? And so I kind of like look at, okay, so if there are certain skills that I can learn, like what can it actually give me can I learn the shortest but give me the highest impact? And using that kind of like mindset kind of help me to also understand my stakeholders or my clients, right? Everyone have a limited amount of time, resource, and things like that. Where do you want to focus on that actually brings you the maximum impact, right? The most meaningful results, whatever it can be, right? So, and I think like, coming to your point about this investment mindset is also quite similar, right? Yeah, where you invest in, where can actually give you the maximum returns. Oh, by the way, I'm not recommending any where to invest, but I mean just basically like the kind of mindset that helped me in my work.
Yeah, it's great that you're clear about that. We're not advocating any kind of investments into crypto, even if we do hold it, but it's the mindset, right? Which is what I wanted you to talk about, and you've put it in a very interesting manner where it's like time is limited, where we're kind of like leveling up different things, and we want to prioritize what's important and what brings us like the best return of investment. So yeah, I thought that was fascinating because I when I talk to designers, very rarely do people tell me about, oh, I want to invest in something or like grow wealth in such a passionate way, right? As we discuss about it. So thanks for sharing that, like how evangelism as a mindset can help designers, but also how being adopting that investor mindset can help grow a career and build a career.
Yeah.
I understand you can't talk about anything that you're doing in the bank right now, but I wanted to ask you from your perspective, because now everyone's talking about Gen AI, and some of the best talents in the world are now working on Gen AI technologies, or even like you said, quantum computing. And there's almost like people are sort of like a talent exodus out of Web3, out of blockchain. Very few people I know still work on it. But I want to get your thoughts, as someone who's a user, as someone who's working on related fintech technologies. What's the potential of blockchain, and is it dead? Is there still potential? Yeah.
I think it's limitless, right? And I think as we actually move towards Web3, I mean, blockchain technology definitely works hand in hand. And a lot of, especially when it comes to security and compliance, right? I think blockchain has played a large role. A lot of, fintech companies or blockchain companies that I actually talk to, right? This is actually a space that is growing a lot, right? Yeah, I think like the concept of blockchain, AI, crypto computing, they are all coming together. They are all related to one another, I would say. And so it definitely continues to evolve.
So what I hear you say is that blockchain isn't dead. Very much alive. There are still great talents and people working on related Web3 technologies and its associated project. And we're looking at, yeah, what might be some of the things that you're observing from the people that you're talking to in this space? What kind of projects are they working on using blockchain? What kind of problems are they solving?
So I think one big part is definitely AML, right? Anti-money laundering, right? Against frauds, deep fakes, right? Especially, with this evolution on how generative AI and it's actually growing at a, I would say the exponential level, right? I mean, there is so much deepfakes going on, right? And I think there are a lot of technologies that's actually trying to counter that, right? And which is also leads me to the earlier point in terms of the usability gap, right? Because there are things that they are so advanced and because they are complicated as well, right? So I think the kind of like, it is a very big opportunity for a lot of like, scams and things like that to happen in the background where people are not aware of that sense of ownership, right? Helping users to be more aware in terms of what are some of these scams that are happening. So I think that's actually a really huge space, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, I would love to talk briefly about it, if you don't mind, because I remember I was investing in NFTs a couple of years ago, and some of the very interesting use cases was then like using the NFT and its associated items, right? Very much like in a game, and using the items to trade like actual real merchandise that was like shipped to me, right? So the aspect on community, which we are so familiar with as gamers, like building communities around NFTs and being part of this community, is also like a very it's also very closely knitted to the entire Web3 culture, right? So like even to the extent of having a certain lingo and speak like touching grass or to the moon, right? Those kind of lingo and stuff that was sort of like this internal speak that's around that. And I found that to be very, very interesting, how there was a convergence, right? From the gaming side of things with Web3, and how it continues to like sort of like play a role, because one of the NFT projects I invested in is still very much well and alive, which is really great. So I think this is quite an interesting space. And you yourself, you're still, yeah. I'm just getting your thoughts. You're still pretty bullish about it, about this whole space itself.
Well, I will say, yeah, there's a lot of projects, right? And because with a lot of this different protocols that's actually coming up, it allows a lot of creators to just create anything that you want. For example, you can always create like a Daven coin or something, right? And it's so easy these days to actually like put on a project, raise fund. It's just almost like this is like a very modernized version of your Kickstarter, right? And the thing is because I would say that I think like this topic and stuff like all these projects, they are being also being very prevalent and heavily discussed and talked about and promoted in social media, right? So there is of course this element, the social element, right, of really influencing how people should be paying attention to certain projects, or because there is actually a certain influencer who actually start on this project, and then there's actually a wave of supporters, right? Whether how these projects how practical are the use cases, that's another thing, right? So you can see that even like all the different memes, the PP coin and things like that, they all started with a very fun project, and suddenly it just
Dogecoin and Trump coin. Yeah,
yeah, so
there
like
you go.
yeah, exactly. So it's like, the social media just went crazy, and then like, someone started a project that, okay, monkey see, monkey do. But what exactly the value does it bring? Don't know. So there's a lot of this, right? It's all, I
Yeah.
mean, I look at this, it's almost like your Patreon or what do you call that? Behance for designers, right? Like people will just
Yeah.
design for it. But in this case, it's like a lot of this interesting crypto project.
Creators, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
And teams, yeah, that are involved. If I could be more specific and ask, I want to ask you about your crypto holding investments, like how much percentage are you putting here and there? But what are there are very different currencies, right? And there are a lot of different coins. Which coin or which like ecosystem is like, do you think is doing a good job like supporting creators and supporting projects, and you're very excited about it, yeah, and invested in it as well, yeah. Once again, this is not investment advice.
It's a tough one. Sometimes I would say that like it has to have a personal kind of like a resonance to it, right? So I think, like, give you an example, like maybe 2 years ago, right? So there's this topic around like interoperability, right? That a lot of I would say like blockchain companies, financial institution, everyone are just talking about it, because I think there's while there's this explosion of a lot of interesting projects, but they are all running in silos. Everyone is just doing their own passion project. They build their own on their own protocols, right? And it just became so silos. Okay, what's the use case? How can we connect certain things, right? Like let's say if I were to bring in like the idea of that Ready Player One, right? I mean, of course, when you watch the show, it seems like this character can jump from one to another, and then you
I
can
love that movie.
interesting, yeah, right. And then you have like a Super Mario inside this random space itself. So sorry, I just want to sound check, just make sure that Dylan is still there. Let's see his camera on. Are you still there?
I think I mentioned I love that movie.
Okay, sorry, the camera is off, so I can't see.
Yeah. So I just turned it off because
okay,
there was a lag.
apologies.
Yeah.
I thought it was like, in
Yeah.
case I'm just
All good,
talking
all good.
to vacuum. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that concept itself is super interesting, right? Like you can have like Super Mario character driving a Lamborghini in some certain metaverses, right? I mean, in that movie, that's in real, but in reality, it's not like that. Like if you literally have two metaverse space, you can't connect in that sense. Like technologically, like people are trying to figure out how do you go from one space to another space. So they're actually very interesting collabs, and there are actually certain projects that manage to crack that, right? And then you start seeing that, oh, they are actually some of the big brands. Because of that, right? A lot of big brands suddenly just jump on a bandwagon of, oh, okay, now that from the marketing point of view, right? I can actually bring my products into the metaverse. For example, like Adidas or Nike, right? You can, if you have this particular character, they have the shoes, now you can wear a virtual Nike Air Jordan, for example, right? Then, or you can wear your virtual Stan Smith. And so that concept itself, there's some projects initiative that is actually tackling that and trying to bring a lot of these big brands, right? And this actually create a world of like consumerism in the metaverse, which I find it fascinating, because it's not just only about bringing the asset, it's actually about like how do you actually connect with all these different systems together, and then you are able to, from a design perspective, from a UX perspective, right, you are able to create this truly immersive experience, right? So like I will say that like maybe the next modern version of the World of Warcraft, right? I can actually bring in a special tool from somewhere, right? Another world, and I can use it in my world. Maybe the game creators may go against it because it's like that's not my story plot. But it may be interesting.
It is an interesting point, and I learned two things. I mean, first of all, I know you didn't like mention any specific protocols or cryptocurrency like XRP or Ethereum. But what I learned is that, and this is probably like true, you know, looking at how Gen AI is like developing, like it almost seems like blockchain is waiting for its killer app like ChatGPT, right? Like which introduced the entire wave for Gen AI. And because of that, that really like got everyone incredibly excited because of the number of use cases and its practicality to it. So it looks like blockchain is still waiting for that. And the second perspective is that it never occurred to me previously that some of these technologies are converging, but not just between blockchain to blockchain or project to project, right? But even like the potential of AR, augmented reality, integrating with like blockchain, or as you said earlier, or alluded to earlier, that potentially Gen AI having certain use cases and using blockchain technologies to like validate like the truth of a content, right? And minting it and having a unique identifier to it in the process. So
yes,
I find that to be quite fascinating and interesting because once we see these technologies like converging and we start to see the use cases expanding, I don't even know what to think as a designer, right? As someone who has design skills, because you know we will be dealing with like very different types of interface. Like even as I'm talking to my students and say, hey, you know, if you look at like voice technology, if you look at augmented reality, we're looking at very different modalities of like interaction versus like screens. And there's so many other considerations that you have to think about. Like even now, as some of my students are working on interfaces related to Gen AI, right? They're thinking about it from like a chat perspective, and that's a totally different set of considerations. You don't have to do a lot of screens, but you have to think through quite a number of use cases. So yeah, so that I think I don't know. It feels somewhat overwhelming, but also somewhat exciting. What do you think?
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think like even the experience of, let's say, buying something, right? Let's say in the metaverse, is definitely different from how we learn from Web 2.0. Add in your credit card, put in some of this information, and then a few of the transaction screen, blah blah blah, and then okay, you have the item shipped to you, right? And like when you actually doing this type of, let's say, a purchase or a transaction in a Web3, or I mean in a metaverse, right? I'll actually talk about metaverse because that's actually very interesting, right? It's like you have this virtual character. How are you going to use your virtual character as that KYC? And how do you actually transact, right? And the mode of transaction is no longer just about credit cards. This is actually using a different type of currency. And because of the nature of the currency, the POS machine, so to speak, right, that we are all familiar with in our real world is very different. And how do you actually make sure that you are paying to the right vendor, authenticating it? And because of authenticating, that kind of like the virtual wallet is so different because it's like you are trying to release a certain amount of money and then transfer. Like that experience itself, it has to be very rich and it has to be very, to your point, right, well thought of. And the thing is, and what is actually the step after, right? So like in Web 2.0 is like, okay, buying this thing, waiting for it to ship to your place. But in the virtual world, it will be how does this particular thing that you have just purchased get adds into your virtual inventory, and how do you use it? And that part, that connectivity, I think is super interesting, right? And then that's when,
Yeah.
okay, like, where am I going to send this item? Let's say if my virtual character, if I bought a pair of Nike shoes, right? I want to
Yeah.
wear my character. How am I going to transfer this particular shoe from my wallet to, let's say, another metaverse, like transferring to the inventory, and then I can, extract it, right? So like now we are just describing about this process. Wow, it's like, wow, so
Yeah.
different, right? And it's no longer in the 2D space. Then what about the 3D space?
Yeah.
How are you going to control it?
It,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you mentioned that because like I think even as we're talking about it, we're kind of using like existing analogies, right, of what
Yeah.
we understand,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, point of sale, oh, that sounds like a cashier or something. And then we're like
Yeah.
translating it in the 3D space and thinking about it, oh, okay, that's kind of like how it works. And I want to bring up a very interesting fact, is that businesses in China actually don't have websites. This was brought to my attention by someone who lives in China, and then I said, okay, if they don't have websites, how do they sell to people? And I said, every company has a mini app,
Mm.
and they go through like WeChat or they go through like Ali,
Yeah.
and they have a mini app on that. So everyone has like a mini app to like do transactions and introduce their products and services, and the entire ecosystem and transactions, everything related to their lives are within the chat and app ecosystem, which is
Yeah.
quite incredible. I'm bringing this example because even while it's sort of like in a 2D space and 2D
Yeah.
screen, um, but it kind of shows you when you're in like a very insular kind of like country, and there's a big push to all use like mobile, like people do adopt it, and there are some very very interesting design interaction patterns
Yeah.
from that, because even the old ladies are using apps, they don't use websites. Yeah, and they do digital payments. Like the old aunties in China don't don't pay cash, they pay by their Alipay wallet. So that was really 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 fascinating. Oh yeah, I remember, like, yeah, someone who works in China brought this to my attention. Yeah.
Yeah, that is actually very true because a few years ago I went to Beijing for one of the conference. I think that was the IXDA, right? So IXDC, yeah. So and one of those interesting developments was actually around the kind of like a marketplace, right? In a ecosystem where all the users are very familiar in, and that is also a version of a immersive experience. And because WeChat has and Alipay has a very strict KYC policies, and they actually kept all the kind of like profile and all the customer information within the app, that actually gives a very seamless experience of buying something, like literally just one click. They don't always ask for your credit card. It's just one time, and every time when you make a transaction, right, or you go to a restaurant, when you scan the QR code on the table to order a food, right, and it's all connected to a wallet. So this is also the point about the interoperability, which I think that WeChat does very well, and it actually keeps the users in this system, right, and there is that helps with a lot of like this retention rate as well, right, and a lot of these services became that platform, right, to reach to the customers because that's where they are. And that has been very effective. So that is definitely very interesting.
I 100% agree. I think that was this Labubu trend,
Mm.
and for Popmart, and then I was in Shanghai, and that was when I bought my first Labubu product because I was buying for my daughter, and then they're like, hey, do you want to sign up for our loyalty program in WeChat? So it was like, okay, okay, great. I'll just put it, and then like they have their own mini games and stuff like that, and it was so interesting. And you are right. It's actually to encourage like further purchasing behavior, because now you got all these points and you want like you have discounts on like your next purchase. It's meant to like keep you in that ecosystem. And yeah, it was just so fascinating. And Luckin Coffee, which
Mm,
is a coffee chain, very big coffee chain in China, um, they don't have any staff getting your orders in some of their shops,
mm,
right? So you literally cannot order from the shop itself. You have to download the app and you have to point that this is the Luckin coffee shop that I'm going to collect my order, and you do everything through your app.
mm.
So yeah, so I just think we are in this like age and era where we as designers, we're not just thinking about screens or like very traditional interfaces. We're also thinking about reimagining like new experiences.
Exactly.
um yeah, so I think it's very, very exciting times.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, do you have anything else to add for our audience listening over here? Is there anything we should like keep our eyes out on, in the horizon that's kind of like up and coming? There any tips for us to like stay relevant in this like economy that's like changing so fast? Yeah.
I think okay, just maybe I'll just share one idea that suddenly just popped into my head as we are having this conversation around like digital wallets, right? Like you know how we have our real world wallet where there's like a lot of this like luxury brands like your LV or Chanel and everything. I was just wondering like if one day someone will actually think about like okay, maybe that's where we'll have like a digital branded wallet. I don't know, does it make sense? Like you have a digital LV wallet or something, right? But there has to be an element where, okay, why am I using this like a branded wallet? Probably it actually increases my security or it actually helps me with my transactions or memberships or things like that, right? And I
That's a
thought
really interesting thought.
that just something that can pop out my crazy idea. I think.
Certainly. No, I mean, you're in the fintech space, but who knows, right? Like who like people might actually want to like invest or like build this project or something. But yeah, like going back to what I asked earlier, because there's just so much technology and new things that are up and coming. Would you have any tips for our audience listening over here? How do I continue to stay relevant as a designer, as a product person? Yeah.
Yeah, I think like yeah, going back to being curious, I guess. Um, because to me, I think like curiosity is actually like a designer's superpower, right? And it is because we are being curious, being interested in a topic, I would say, right? Being interested in terms of okay, outlining it. What do you want to learn more about, right? And nowadays we have a lot of these generative AI tools that can actually help us explore more of the subject that we're interested in. And I would say that try to use it as much as you can. But it's just like when we were just using Google so easily, like searching for stuff, right? And I think that behaviors change, right? And so I think try to leverage a lot more technology to help us to learn even more of it. I think that is going to be quite useful, and staying relevant will be like paying attention to what the news or media is talking about, or like following certain people on like X,
Lovely.
media,
Yeah.
right? Definitely. To actually learn more about it. Yeah, because if you're actually interested in a topic, like nobody will have to tell you to say, hey, go and learn more, right? You definitely have that uh,
Yeah.
natural instinct to say, okay, I'm interested in this topic, I want to learn more of it, right? And the
Yeah.
thing is like, how do we kind of like, after getting all this knowledge, how can we apply it? And I think the
Mm,
application is important.
yeah. I I 100% agree that curiosity is a superpower, and also the reason why I named my company Curious Core. And it recently, like over the weekend, I learned how to code. not like the traditional way, but using AI to help me in the process of building like a product. And I managed to get a product out there without actually knowing JavaScript in detail or
Oh,
knowing how to like push on GitHub. But it felt so like for the first time, it felt so liberating because I'm not frustrated as a designer trying to debug and fix things and plug my knowledge gaps, but the tools which are now so accessible have made it so easy to turn a vision or an idea in my head into like something usable and tangible so very, very quickly. And I feel particularly so excited about it that I like sign up like a full year of subscription on
wow.
Cursor, which is like the tool for it. And I'm like playing with Gen AI like every day right now. So I fully agree that staying curious is very, very important. And just like you said earlier in your career, right, that the fact that you were so passionate about wildlife and how um, the stories that are around it led you to discover UX and now working in the fintech space as a UX design leader. And all of that seems to have connect and curiosity have brought has changed your career trajectory no less. Um, I usually ask every guest like this one question, like since we have a lot of listeners who are trying to start a career in tech or trying to like make sense and become like a leader. Do you have any tips for people who are starting out or trying to like grow as a leader in this field? Yeah.
Well, I'll say like maybe think about like what is actually the goal or the outcome you're trying to achieve, right? And then kind of like work backwards. Like I would say like doing yeah, think about or maybe have a vision in terms of like do something fun, like let's say having a vision board, like okay, where do you see yourself? Let's sort out about 5 years, right? Let's talk about like maybe let's in the next 6 months or in the next 1 year, right? What are some of the things that you feel like okay, a better version of yourself, like a version 2.0 or something, right? And then from there, I think work out baby steps. I would say to say okay, now that I'm at version or 1.0, let's say, right? What is actually the version 1.5, 2.0, right? And from there, kind of like allow whatever that you have learned in the past be those lessons and the stepping stone, right? Like let's say, for me, before I was actually even imagining myself UX. To be honest, that was actually not in my thought. It was UX was a byproduct of where I wanted to do, right? At that point of time, it was okay, I want to help the wildlife, right? And then UX seems to be that method or the channel that helps me to do that, right? And I kind of like start from there and do a lot of experimentation and play. And I'll say that don't be afraid to fail, because no one can do the first thing right, the first time right, right? Just try, experiment. If there are certain things that doesn't work out, doesn't work out, right? But that gives you a lesson that hey, there are other ways that I should try. Yeah, you're on mute. Dylan, you're on mute.
Um, and with that, I'd like to wrap up this conversation. And with that, as Winnie said, remember to play and remember to fail in the process. And thank you so much for being here as part of this episode. And as I hear you say, I hear you get more excited as you're describing different technologies. So that's really wonderful. I understand you have to catch a call with your stakeholders in the US very soon. So I'm going to let you go. And thank you everyone in the live audience for joining us. And we have a special guest next month as well, who's ex Meta, talking about content design. So do look out for our next event. And with that, thank you so much, Winnie, and have a good week ahead.
Thank you for having me, Dylan.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Thank you.